Quick rundown of basic pros and cons. First is how well does the lowest octave play? The Zhao and the Amadeus are both sort of on par with each other in the first octave. I really like the sound of the Zhao in the first octave. It's easy enough to play. And the Amadeus is pretty similar. Maybe not quite as easy. After that, then, in third place would be the Azumi. It sounds good. I really like the sound. It's decent enough to play, and it comes out well, except for the low D and anything below that. And then at the bottom is the Yamaha. It's not like amazing. It's not super rich. It's not like really, really resonant. It's not as easy to get the low notes to sound. Now the Yamaha ends up at the bottom of almost every single one of my rankings. But that's not to say that it's a bad flute. It's actually a really decent flute from my perspective for what it is. The problem is that I think we're kind of comparing it against not its equals. The next for me is the third octave. In this case, I would rank the Amadeus as being higher simply because for my playing, the Amadeus is in tune. And that's not something that I've had experience with my flute. Obviously, you still have to do a little bit of adjusting. It's still a tricky region for many flutes, but it is majoritively easy to get it in tune rather than always being constantly a little bit sharp. So that's amazing. I love that. So the Amadeus is really high up there because of that. Next, below it is the Zhao. It's not as easy to get it in tune. It's not terrible, but it's not really nice and easy like the Amadeus. But the Zhao and the Amadeus, they both sound very nice in the third octave. Just really, gorgeous lyrical sound, and the transitions between notes are pretty easy. And then the next two, of course, are the Azumi, followed by the Yamaha. The Azumi, I'd say it sounds a little bit thinner in the third octave. It's more of a kind of silvery, fluty sound. So if that's what you're into, then, absolutely that is the flute for you. For me, I would prefer to have a little bit more body, a little bit more kind of buzz, even in the third octave, which the Zhao and the Amadeus do give. And then the Yamaha, it's at the bottom, but, still a solid flute for what it is. It doesn't sound quite as nice. It has maybe sort of a slightly more student-ish / intermediate flute sounding sound up there, but it's still pretty good. The next category is the mechanism. My ranking for this, the Azumi is actually at the top. It's very springy. It's very responsive. It's not hard to press down the keys. Next after that is the Zhao, which is kind of a decent mechanism. I don't have any complaints about it. It's fine. The Yamaha is next. It's maybe a little bit, I don't know, I want to say gummier. It's not gummy by any means, but it's gummier. And then last is actually the Amadeus. Again, is this just this individual flute? I don't know. But this individual flute has a very, very, very stiff mechanism. So much so that sometimes while I was playing, my right hand pinky would just rise up of its own accord without me even realizing it, because that key is so hard to push down. So That Amadeus is really stiff. The next category is weight. The Yamaha was the lightest of them all, partly just because it has a lot less silver in it. And also, of course, it doesn't have the B foot. The next after that, I think, is the Azumi, followed by the Zhao, and then at the bottom is the Amadeus. The Amadeus is noticeably heavy for me. It's, you know, you just pick it up and it has weight to it. Some people want a nice, decent, solid, heavy flute. For me, I'm not a huge person. I've got, you know, not giant hands, and I don't necessarily want to be lugging around this big heavy thing when I'm trying to do delicate things with my fingers, right? So for me, being heavier is kind of a downside. Finally, I have two last categories. You'd think that one of these would be the higher up category, that being the overall tone. But interestingly, the main difference for me between these flutes was not the tone, but the playability. So overall, the tone of most of these flutes was all very good. They were all very nice sounding flutes. There are some slight differences. Number one, I think for me, is the Zhao, but it's kind of tied with the Amadeus. I think if I did a blind test and I had no other way of knowing under my fingers which flute it was, I probably would have some difficulty distinguishing the Zhao from the Amadeus. They both have a nice kind of buzzy, resonant tone, which is something that I really look for in a flute. And you can get decent kind of color variations in the tone with both of them. The Amadeus has, like I said, a very similar tone. I almost feel like it's maybe ever so slightly less rich, maybe a little bit more choked, just slightly, just an incy bit, not that much. The Azumi, I mentioned when I was talking about the upper octave, just overall, the Azumi has a more sort of silvery, fluty sound. It's less buzzy and it's more kind of floating to me. I don't know if that comes out in the recordings, but that's how it feels to me. And the Yamaha, again, at the bottom, but still really solid flute. It has kind of a resonant tone to me. It's very buzzy and has some body to it. But the problem that I don't like is that it doesn't have quite as much kind of oomph behind the resonance. And it kind of only has one color. You know, it's like that's what you get. And then finally, dynamics. The Zhao and the Amadeus, they have a fairly similar dynamic range. You can get a lot from them. You can get a little bit from them. With my flute, I feel a little bit limited, dynamically speaking. There's kind of a solid range where you can get a good tone, and then you can get a little bit louder and a little bit softer, but you can't really go much further than that. The Zhao and the Amadeus and the Azumi also, they give me a little bit more range. And it's not just that they're louder, it's that they are louder, but they also can be softer. And then finally at the bottom, again, the Yamaha. It's not bad. I just want to push this idea. This Yamaha flute is not bad at all. It's just, it's not kind of in the same tier as these flutes in terms of the dynamic range that's possible. So yeah, I don't know if this is helpful to anyone. I kind of put this together for myself in case I was curious in the future. We're actually getting a second round of flutes to try and see if it's worth it for me to get something more pricey. But anyways, I hope this was helpful. I hope you find a decent flute. Yeah.